Hello and welcome to Poleasy, the series that's all about making learning policy debate easy. In this series, we're specifically focusing on introduction to policy debate, and in this video, we'll be focusing on the basics of being negative. So if you haven't already watched the first and second video about policy debate essentials and AF basics, I suggest that you do that, but thanks again for joining me, Coach Smith, and hopefully this will be useful for you. So the first question I want to ask is, what exactly does the negative do, and how do they win in a policy debate? So they give 4 speeches, the 1NC, the 2NC, the 1NR, and the 2NR, and they need to prove the resolution false by proving that the affirmative's plan is not a desirable departure from the status quo. So the negative does this through providing on-case attacks, which is where they're answering the affirmative's case, so harms, inherency, solvency, or their advantages, but they also do this through off-case attacks, which are presenting topicality and disadvantages. So on-case means that you are attacking arguments that were on the case provided by the affirmative, whereas off-case arguments are arguments that were not on the case of the affirmative. They are off of their case, but they are still attacking the stock issues. And speaking of the stock issues, the negative needs to only win one stock issue to win the entire debate. So think of if the affirmative is trying to build a stool, the negative is trying to saw the legs off of that stool. And if you were able to cut off any part of any of the 3 legs, then the stool is going to fall over, which means that you as the negative will win the debate. So the first stock issue that the affirmative needs to win, and that if you win the entire debate, is significant harms. So the affirmative must prove that there are serious problems in the world today. And if the negative can prove that the current world doesn't have any problems, then they prove we don't need to change it. So you can attack harms in a couple ways. You can argue that they're not significant, so they're not really big issues, so we don't really need to change the world, that they're not even occurring in the first place, or that actually they're not even problems, they're good things. They're not harms. They're things that we should allow to continue. So the second stock issue is inherency. The affirmative needs to prove that the current world is unable to fix the serious problems that they talk about in their harms contention. So if the negative can prove that the current world actually can or will fix those serious problems, then they prove we don't need to change the current world. So you can attack inherency by arguing that the current world has already solved the problems, that the current world will solve the problems, or that the current world can solve the problems without the resolution. Which brings us to the third stock issue, which is topicality, and it's also an off-case argument. So the affirmative needs to prove that their plan is an example of the resolution. If the negative can prove that the plan is not an example of the resolution, then they prove that the affirmative has not presented a reason to affirm the resolution. It would be like the affirmative saying that they win a basketball game because they did a 360 jump shot out of bounds. Obviously, that wouldn't count towards the score, so proving that they have a good plan that isn't part of the resolution means that the judge shouldn't affirm the resolution. The affirmative did not win the debate. Topicality is an off-case argument, so it is not presented by the affirmative with the other on-case arguments in the 1AC. Instead, it is presented by you, the negative, in the 1NC if you choose to do so. And you win topicality by proving 3 things, which we'll go over way more in depth in a later video. And that is, there is an important definition of a part of the resolution, the affirmative plan does not follow that definition, and that the affirmative should lose the debate because of it. So if the resolution was students should bring Coach Smith a drink, and their plan was students should bring Coach Smith a puppy, then maybe your definition of the word drink is a liquid meant for consumption. Then you say that the affirmative plan, a puppy, is not a liquid meant for consumption, and so because they said bring a puppy instead of a drink, that they should lose the debate. Which brings me to the fourth stock issue of solvency. So the affirmative needs to prove that their plan can solve the serious problems they've talked about. And if the negative can prove that the plan won't solve those problems, then they prove that the affirmative hasn't given a reason to affirm the resolution. If the resolution won't fix anything, why would we affirm it? And you can attack solvency in a few ways. You can argue that there are other causes or alternate causes to the problems that the plan can't solve. You can argue that the plan isn't strong enough to solve the problems, or you could argue that the plan actually makes the problems worse. And then the fifth stock issue is advantages. And remember, advantages are a combination of harms, inherency, and solvency. So the affirmative has to prove that the plan creates significant benefits for society. And if the negative can prove that there are no benefits of affirming or implementing the affirmative plan, then that means that they haven't really proven as the affirmative that the resolution should be implemented. So you attack advantages in the same way that you would attack inherency, solvency, and harms. So you would attack the first part of an advantage, uniqueness, by saying no uniqueness. You prove that the status quo has, will, or can solve the problems, so the plan isn't needed, kind of like attacking inherency. Then you can say no link or link turn. You can prove that the plan can't solve the problems or that it makes them worse, which would be like attacking solvency. And then you can say no impact or impact turn. You could prove that the bad impact the plan claims to solve for either isn't a big deal, so like no, the harm doesn't matter, or it's actually a good thing, so it's not a harm, and that's supposed to say impact turn. Then the last stock issue is disadvantages. So the affirmative has to prove that their plan creates more positive consequences than negative consequences. And you win that stock issue, and if you do win that stock issue, you've proven that the resolution shouldn't be implemented because it's going to do more bad than good. Disadvantages are off-case arguments. So the affirmative doesn't present disadvantages with their other on-case arguments. You get to decide if you want to present disadvantages. And if you can win a disadvantage by proving 3 things, which we will also go more in depth on in a later video. You need to prove that the current world is doing well, that the plan pushes the world in the wrong direction, and that will result in a serious problem. So it's kind of like the opposite of an advantage. An advantage says the current world is bad, that the plan makes it better, and that's a good thing. You say that the current world is doing well, that the plan makes it worse, and that's a bad thing. So attacking on-case arguments as the negative might seem a little confusing, so we're going to break down an example. So if you remember from the last video, we made a hips case about the plan of bringing Coach Smith a Dr. Pepper. So this is that case, and now I'm going to show you different ways that the negative might respond to it. So their first contention was harms, and we respond with Coach Smith doesn't feel thirsty against their first harm. Coach Smith feeling tired is good because he'll take a nap later. You could respond to their second harm with that. And then you could respond to their third harm with Coach Smith just feels a little sad and not unloved. Then you could respond to their second contention about inherency by saying Coach Smith isn't too poor, he just got paid. Coach Smith isn't too busy to sleep, he's just always on TikTok. And then Coach Smith just got a student from last week, or gift from a student last week, so he doesn't lack gifts from students. And then you could answer their third contention about solvency by saying Dr. Pepper will actually make Smith more thirsty, not less thirsty, that Dr. Pepper will only give him a little bit more energy so it won't really solve the problem of him being tired, and that Dr. Pepper won't make up for all the ungrateful things his students have said and done. So you can attack harms in a bunch of different ways, inherency in a bunch of different ways, and solvency in a bunch of different ways. And if you were able to disprove any of those 3 contentions, then you have taken out the affirmative stool, you have proven that the affirmative did not present a complete case. So there are 2 different overall strategies when it comes to how you're going to choose which arguments to put in which speeches for being negative. The first strategy is a split constructive strategy. So in this strategy, in the 1NC, the first negative constructive, you only present off-case arguments. So you only present topicality and disadvantages. Then in the second negative constructive, you attack the on-case arguments. You attack harms, inherency, solvency, advantages. So that's how you split the constructives. The 1NC is about off-case, the 2NC is about mostly on case, but then you pick one of the topicality or disadvantage arguments that your partner read in the 1NC and you extend one of them, which means you bring it up again, you talk about it, you defend it, that type of stuff. And then the first negative rebuttal would pick a different off-case argument from their first speech to extend. The second strategy for being negative is called the shell and extend strategy. So in the first negative constructive, you would present both off-case arguments, so topicality and disadvantages, and you would attack on-case arguments, harms, inherency, solvency, advantages. Then the second negative constructive would extend some on-case attacks and then 1 or 2 off-case arguments, and the first negative rebuttal would extend a different off-case argument. So in the shell and extend method, you're not splitting the constructives, you're splitting the negative block, the 2NC and the 1NR. So why would we want to use these strategies? Well, the split constructive, you can read more off-case arguments because you have more time, usually 3 to 5. You have more time for on-case attacks in the 2NC, and you make the 1AR much harder. But negatives, there's less time to defend your off-case in the block. The aff-case doesn't get attacked until almost halfway through the debate, and then it's seen as unfair by some. Whereas on the shell and extend strategy, it's viewed as the most fair to the affirmative. You get more time to extend off-case in the block, and the 2AC is a little harder. But the downsides are you have less off-case arguments, usually only have time for 1 to 3. There's less time for on-case attacks, and the 1AR is much easier. So that's it for this video, where what we went over was basically discussing the basics of being negative, where we talked about how you need to attack the stock issues, you need to attack the on-case arguments, and then you need to present some off-case arguments like topicality and disadvantages, which are what we'll go over more in depth on in the next few videos.